Hello and welcome to Voice of Liberty podcast. I am sitting down today to discuss the murder of George Floyd with both Aaron Goss of BreadTube Dreams for Libsoc Teens and political activist Brian Ellison. Thank you guys for being on the show tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
So, as I told you guys in the pre-show, what I wanted to really get into here is a discussion on the murder of George Floyd. And then what has happened since, what we see happening, our thoughts on it. Of course, all of us come from a similar political background and ideology. Before we get into this, I'm just going to throw something up here quick. For anybody watching, always remember that comments are live. Anything that is pertinent to the show, I can see. I will throw it up on the screen, and we can discuss it live as we are broadcasting. So, without taking up too much time here, George Floyd, this murder has reignited a discussion on police brutality in a way I haven't seen in quite a while, and it has spawned into something that I didn't really expect to see across this country. We are seeing protests and just absolute anger coming out from multiple different communities pertaining to this. So what I want to start with is when the video broke. How long did it take for you guys to find that video when it actually broke and when it leaked out? And what were your initial reactions to it? I mean, it's a horrific video for anybody that hasn't watched it.
So it happened on Memorial Day. I think I saw it the next day. So I think I saw it on Tuesday, sometime Tuesday morning. I watched the whole video, and I assume my reaction was probably like most people. I mean, I was just horrified. I mean, just to watch a 10-minute long video of somebody being murdered. I mean, you saw the murder from start to finish. It was incredibly horrifying. It made me angry. I mean, that's kind of the space I live in these days. You know, I've been fascinated and following these kinds of police abuses, police killings, abuse of power and stuff like that for years. And so it makes my blood boil every time I see it. So I had the same reaction that I typically have. I mean, I was furious. But the reaction is always, it's always followed up by, okay, I'm furious, but nobody is really going to give a shit enough to do anything about it. And that's where I was wrong.
Yeah, definitely.
I actually watched it the same day that it came out. And, what got me was in a similar vein to, say, like the Daniel Shaver murder. It was so agonizingly drawn out. You know, a lot of these murders that the cops do, you see them and they're like over in 15, 20 seconds. I mean, it's very quick. But this one, you got to see the whole. I mean, there's no justification for the amount of time that was taken to commit the murder. There was ample opportunity to stop it, and it just didn't happen. And so that's what really made it, like, I think, capture the public consciousness, was that it was so deliberate and methodical. Like, I mean, it was just a matter of the fact that they knew what they were doing, and they chose to continue to do it, even on camera. Yeah.
And it was made more obvious the fact that they knew that they were doing it because you have the bystanders that were pleading with them. Not only did you have him himself saying, I can't breathe, let me go, whatever. You have the bystanders saying, like, look, he's not even moving anymore. He's, not just like, hey, he's not moving. He sees somebody come in and take the pulse, and like presumably there was no pulse, right? And the dude didn't even move his knee. I mean, so you see just the absolute callousness. And I think that really, I think you guys are right. That's what really captured the public's attention, was that it was just so obviously deliberate.
Yeah, and to touch on something that Aaron said there, I mean, the length of time, that's was the most shocking for me when I saw this video come out. I mean, I've watched all of these other police killings and murders that they're over so fast. 5, 10, 20 gunshots, and it's done. It's over. There's nothing else. But beyond the initial video, what I think pissed me off more was the videos that have come out since, from other angles, from once he was detained out of the car, once he was forcibly removed from the car. I mean, you saw the lack of compassion for humanity from the very beginning of this, and all for what? A forgery crime. And that's what has absolutely drove me over the edge. And I'm from a martial arts background. For a cop not to know that what they were doing by digging their knee so far into his throat that they would be cutting off his his airway, that's just absolutely ridiculous and horrendous. But that is what has, I think, caught everybody by attention, that the absolute lack of humanity is vivid in this in a way that it's never been before. And I get where some people are like, the protest should have said stay peaceful, but moving into the protest, everybody deserves to be pissed off in the way they are right now. Everybody deserves to be angry because nothing has happened, and it just has proved it again. That what makes me say be pissed off and do what you're doing is that we just got done with the murder of a black man in Georgia. And that wasn't by cops, but yet it showed the injustice of the police system. And here we are now, yet again, on this topic. And since more stories are starting to surface from across all different police forces. Now, I got aggravated yesterday when they announced the third-degree murder charges against him. And we were just discussing, different laws in different states on this. Third-degree murder is a mistake that ended in death, is the general consensus here. I pushed you, you fell, you hit your head, you died. That's third-degree murder as a general consensus. And I was talking to people that say this should be second degree because they worked together previously, because it has come out since that they worked at the same nightclub as security, and that previously the cop showed lack of compassion there. He showed lack of humanity in that job and an inability to hold his temper. And I don't know what you guys have to add into that specific with all those details that are now coming about the history of this man.
I've really only just kind of heard the rumor. I saw something about that where they had worked together previously at a security job. I don't know that would necessarily have any bearing. I mean, look, when you're talking about the difference between first and second degree murder, both involve specific intent, the intent to murder, right? The intent to kill somebody. And it's my understanding with third degree that it's essentially negligent homicide. It's like you intended to do what you were doing, but you didn't intend to kill him. And so, I mean, to me, it just seems like a cop out from the prosecutor to say, you know what, we're going to be too lazy to prove intent. I mean, I think you can prove intent when you say the guy's not moving anymore and he maintains his position and doesn't move, and they check his pulse and he has no pulse and he maintains his position and doesn't move. I think there's a good argument for an intent there. And so I think that second degree murder would certainly be appropriate. And I think that I think perhaps the writing is on the wall for where this thing is going to go with a third degree murder charge. Even, I mean, it's a cop out. And whether or not the guy's found guilty is a whole other story. Is he being arrested and charged right now just to appease the public in hopes that they'll stop rioting? Maybe. I mean, we've seen it before, and the trial becomes a dog and pony show. I mean, this reminds me of 1993 in LA after Rodney King. I mean, and that wasn't even a murder. But they put him on trial, and it was this whole show that they were going to be, and ultimately they're like, they didn't really do anything wrong. And when that happens again in this case, if things calm down before that, I have mixed feelings about that, I suppose. It's going to blow back up. Like, this cop needs to be convicted. And frankly, I think, and I'll get the, oh, you're not a libertarian. Look, this guy should have been drug out in the street and hung from a light post the next day. Like, that would have been justice. Like, that would have literally been justice. It's not the society we live in, but hell, it's a society I want to live in.
Yeah, I gotta admire the restraint of those protesters that were around his home that didn't do that. That just wanted to seek actual justice in whatever capacity our criminal justice system is capable of delivering. But I got to be a little bit more optimistic with the third-degree murder as opposed to second-degree. With seeing so many cops that actually do get convicted, the few that do, escaping justice because we claim that they've been overcharged, or, with Zimmerman, for instance, not a cop, but, that Zimmerman got away because they claimed he was overcharged. If it sticks, I would rather have a third-degree murder that doesn't stick with a second degree. I would rather see the man in jail than not. If they fail to prove intent or fail to prove whatever capacity needs to be made to justify a second-degree murder charge.
I think my biggest problem, though, with him getting convicted and going to jail is that he's going to get put into protective custody. I mean, a man like this belongs in Gen Pop. I'm a big proponent of letting jailhouse justice take its course. But we all know this guy is, if he doesn't for some reason get let out on release, he's going to wind up in some protective custody where he's going to be away from the people that would actually take out action on him and bring real justice on him. And that, I think, is just something we've seen it before. And I don't understand where this happens, that this man is going to be protected from the reaction to his crimes.
Right. And remember, keep in mind, this is not like a first-time offender. I mean, This guy he's killed at least once, I think maybe twice before. I've read conflicting reports about that, but he's got 18 complaints against him throughout his career. Now, I'm sure that cops get bad complaints against them. But the other thing is they do a lot of shit wrong that they don't get complaints against them for. And so I think that for somebody who has that kind of track record, I mean, convicting him for one thing just isn't enough. This is why I say the real justice here is this man no longer walks the earth. Like, that's where we're at right now. That's what this is. And you could see it in the fact that he did not care when he was sitting there killing that man in real time. Over the course of 10 minutes, we watched it happen. No flinch, no emotion, no anything, no listening, I mean, he could not be bothered to check the guy's pulse. They're like, he's bleeding out of his nose. This is not a human being.
No. This
is somebody that has no business existing in the world that you and I exist in. And so the fact that we'll probably never see real justice, I'm not a big fan of prisons in general, but, this is the kind of guy that should go to prison. And you're right. Hopefully prison would be able to dole out what I would consider to be real justice.
And, the lack of compassion, just to touch on the video one more time, when you had the onlookers begging George to get up and get in the police car, and George was literally saying, I will. I can't, though. Like, this goes also into the one thing I wanted to touch on before we get into the rioting and everything, which is there are 3 other police officers at a minimum who are still walking free right now. You had the one police officer who was an onlooker, watch this whole thing out happen. He could have intervened. He could have stopped this. He's walking free right now. You had one sitting on George's back, and you had one on his legs. And these 3 cops are both pleading the fifth and walking free still for some reason. If me, and Aaron hopped on someone's body and did that type of harm, we would all 3 be facing justice right now. We would not be walking free.
We have a contemporary example of that in the vigilante killing of Ahmaud Arbery. I mean, you've got all 3 of those men that were involved in his murder, that were all they're all in jail right now. They're all pending a trial. Only one of them actually dealt the killing blow, but all 3 of them are in jail. And it's different for cops because they're special.
But as a fair comparison, that happened in February, and it was only recently that there were any arrests made. And so I think that, but again, with that case, I don't know that it's even a fair comparison because there was that law enforcement connection because the old man was retired law enforcement. I mean, it's, there's so many dynamics at play. Will these other officers be charged eventually? Who knows? Who knows what they'll be charged with? Accessory, Who knows? Again, but the reality is that they had every opportunity to stop this. Every one of those 4 individuals had the opportunity to stop it. They had onlookers pleading with them to stop it. And these people are so callous. They exist in a world where human life is not valuable to them. It's an us versus them mentality with the cops. They look at the public as their enemies. And I know this because I went to the police academy and I trained with these people. Like, this is not, they don't look at it as serving the public. It's us against them. They look at themselves as warriors and that the public is the enemy. And so, you know what? You're right. We're at war. We're at war. If we're the enemies of the cops are our enemies. And it's time. And I guess maybe we roll into talking about the riots. Like, dude, you have no idea. It was the best day of my life when I heard that the police station was burning to the ground.
Well, I want to dig into that a little bit more before we go into the riots, because I do want to talk about that a little bit more. You talked about how you should view the cops as your enemies. How do you think is the best way to get the public on board with that concept? I mean, what can be done other than what we've seen with these videos? I mean, if it's just in such a stark contrast already, and yet most of the public is still under the idea that the cops are our protectors. So how can you change that? How can you change their minds?
I think that's happening right now. Honestly.
I mean, I think I'd have to disagree with you, Henry. I don't think it's changing. I think that the people who understand that are finally acting out about it. They're finally reacting to it, and they're finally taking it into their own hands. But you have a huge segment of the population that, cops have a tough job. Even if this guy messed up, they're generally good people. And the only way you get to a point, and trust me, Aaron, this is a question that I've really struggled with because I've focused a core component of my activism on trying to bring this to light. And I've tried different ways. I've tried being, holding public demonstrations, doing cop watching. Hell, I made a card game to try and promote the concept. But it's like, I don't know that we can. This is one of those things where everything it's ingrained in people that the police are the good guys. And the media, the left-leaning media, promotes that same ideology that cops are the good guys. Cops are your friends. Here we saw a CNN reporter getting arrested live on TV the other day, and he gets out of jail. And I don't know if you guys saw this, but he's giving the interview when he gets out of jail. And he's like, well, they were after they had me in custody, they were very professional and respectful. And I told them that I understand that they had a job to do. And I'm like, dude, they just arrested you for literally no reason. And here you are, like, forgiving them and throwing down with them like it was a cool thing. And
I think I didn't arrest him for no reason. They arrested him specifically because he was filming a specific location that they did not want him to film. So they arrested him on a phony charge, got him out of the way, and that cleared them to be able to do whatever they want. They had the latitude to do what they wanted to do.
Right. So I guess I should clarify: no good reason, no legal reason, no justifiable
exactly.
reason, right? So of course they had a reason, right?
But you are right.
I just thought the reason was because I figured they were sold because he said, the guy said he was just doing his job and following orders, and I thought the order must have been arrest the first black guy you see, and he just happened to be the one in front of the camera. Yeah. But to get kind of more to the core of your question, the only real time I've seen where people have an impact on this thought process of where the cops are not your friends, the cops are actually your enemies, the cops are working against your interests every day, is when people are personally touched by this. I mean, even when people get a traffic ticket, go to traffic court. It makes me want to puke when I go to traffic court because all the people in there are like, oh yeah, the cop was really nice to me. I was just hoping to come in and I could not get the points and just pay the $200 fine. It's like I get to traffic court and I'm like, fuck you. I'll pay the fine, whatever. You're a piece of shit. You're a fucking liar. And then I'll tell the judge the same thing. Like, this is a racket. But people who get abused by it, they still suffer from Stockholm syndrome. They still are like, you know what? They're just doing their job. They still believe this even when they're impacted. And so I think it takes something very traumatic to get somebody to do that, to get somebody to realize, like, look, the cops are not the good guys. When you call the cops, you're calling a hit squad, and you have no idea who they're going to kill. And so I wish I had the answer to that question. I've contemplated that for countless hours. I don't know.
Yeah, there was such a stark contrast between the way the nation reacted to Amy Cooper, I think her name was, when Yeah. When she was calling the cops, and the story broke afterwards about the impact that calling the cops has on black people, like half the nation, or more than half the nation, probably 80% of the nation, was like, I don't understand what the big deal is. So he gets cops called on him, and he didn't do anything wrong, so he'll obviously not have any problems. And then the other 20% is like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, drilling into people's head, like the idea that, like, if you call the cops, understand what you're calling for. You call the cops when you think somebody needs to die. Like, if somebody needs to die, then maybe it's an appropriate time to call the cops. But it needs to be pretty important because you can't determine who that somebody is, right? So how do we get that into people's head? Like, if anybody out there listening has any ideas, I'm all ears, because I'm willing to do maybe a little less than I was a couple years ago, but I'm willing to do a lot of things to try and get that message out there.
And I mean, rolling into the protests, and I'm going to quick loop back to something Aaron said earlier. Kudos to the protesters when they were standing outside that cop's house prior to a huge line and barricade of cops getting there. Kudos to them for not breaking in and taking this guy out to the streets and handling business. I mean, kudos to them on that. The amount of self-restraint to be able to not do that is unbelievable, especially since, I mean, I don't know if I was a family member or a close friend or something like that of someone that got killed in this manner, if I would be able to restrain myself, to be honest. But the riots, I mean, there is a interesting divide happening in this country right now, not just in the Republican and Democratic parties, not just in the country as a whole, but even right here within the Libertarian Party, where it's like protesting's okay, but rioting and looting, that's wrong. Don't do it. And where, suddenly these people, their anger needs to not be focused on tearing down the things that keep them prisoner to the state. And this is the real core of the thing I wanted to get to here with us, because I know, Brian, you said that you're getting ready to head out after this show. I am trying to figure out a way that maybe I can make my way down to Philly, because this is something that needs to be talked about. These riots are justified in every way, shape, and form. I like you, Brian. When I saw that the third precinct was burning to the ground, I was freaking cheering. I was so excited to see that. Wow, these people just proved that the police do not actually have domain over them, and that's what I want to get the thoughts on here.
I mean, I think that so within the Libertarian Party, I think there's really just this kind of people have it drilled in, this idea of property rights as being what libertarianism is all about. And that's, I think, where a lot of this stems from. If you don't understand or respect property rights, you're not a libertarian. And if you loot or riot or burn businesses or hurt private businesses, that's wrong. And that's more like, on its surface, right? If we're talking about a society sans government, where you literally have, this guy owns a business and does his thing privately, and we're or in a collective, like, I forget that, you guys always consider me a leftist, like I don't, but say we're working in a commune or whatever, right? And everybody is voluntarily interacting with each other, and somebody acts against you. Of course, it would be inappropriate to go tear down, burn down your neighbor's business, right? That makes no sense. But in the society we live in, every business is an extension of the state, right? Every business is a fiction created by the state, and their liability is limited by the state, and they use the state to enforce their property rights, and they become nothing more than an extension of the state, and they benefit from the system the way it is. And so I think that people get really caught up in these black and whites of like, oh, it's property rights, but they can't look at all of the gray areas, and this whole thing is gray. Everything about this is gray. And so you're talking about, the system is not just a system of government. These businesses prop up the government. The businesses and the government are one and the same. You can't separate that. But the right libertarians, that's where you draw this huge distinction between right libertarians and libertarians, is the fact that they see this as property being superior to everything. And they see that, oh, well, if you take my property, they cannot make that disconnect that this is not if the property is being supported and upheld and protected by the state, it's not private property. It's not individual property. It's not personal property. And so I think that's where people really get hung up on this. And I'm hoping that that's where the disconnect is. And maybe we can talk to them about it and make them understand. Certainly not all of them are going to understand, but I really think that it's just a fundamental misunderstanding and focusing more on these black and white and ignoring all of the gray in the middle.
I mean, I take a slightly different route than that, because I do think that it is unequivocally wrong to burn down someone's business. I think that there's gradients to it. I think that burning down a Target and burning down an AutoZone isn't nearly as bad as burning down somebody's like one-man operation where he's selling cigarettes, or he's selling, I don't know, there was like a gentleman that ran a restaurant that the restaurant's burned down now, and it was just a family-run operation. I think that's much more significant than the Target or the AutoZone. But that being said, I think that all of it, including the Target and the AutoZone, is not ideal. The ideal would be for the rioters to focus their attention solely on government buildings. But I think what the disconnect between left libertarians and right libertarians is that we recognize as left libertarians that life is sacred. Life is all that matters, and property can be rebuilt. Whereas right libertarians take a much harder stake on property rights. And so when I look at this situation, I see something it's not ideal that they would be burning down private buildings, but in the face of the magnitude of the situation and the amount of hurt that these people are feeling as a result of the fact that they continually are unable to address their grievances in any sort of meaningful forum, and this is the only avenue that they have left to express how hurt they are, that any amount, like I said earlier, I was kind of being hyperbolic, I think the day before yesterday or something, I could see the entire city of Minneapolis burn, and it would be okay if these people would achieve some sort of meaningful progress. If we could see some sort of systemic reform to the point where this sort of situation would never happen again, the entire city could burn. And so that's where I'm at with it.
And I mean, to chime in on there, I guess I do sit with Aaron on this, that ideally I don't want to see a private business that someone built with their own hands burn. The Target burning, I could care less about. As I said to someone who was going after me for talking about the Target burning or being okay with looting the Target, I don't give a shit about the Target. They're insured. They're a giant corporation. They can recoup that. That test store, because that's what it was. It was a test store, used the test systems and technologies meant to target poor people. Burn the fucking thing to the ground. I don't care. The AutoZone burning, as it's come out, looks like it might have been set by a cop trying to excite the riots and then use it as something against the rioters. But even if it was the rioters that burned it down, I hold the same stance towards that as I do the Target. Now, you know what? Unfortunately, small businesses in multiple cities right now are getting ransacked. The anger's coming out. And if it leads, I'll agree with Aaron and completely. If it leads to something that brings a resolution and changes and fixes this shit, then guess what? In the end, it's worth it. And if it saves lives, it's worth it. I have no feeling there. But going back to watching the police station burn, that was absolutely, I think all three of us can 100% agree, that was phenomenal to watch. And for me, I liked it because it set this message out there that they do not control us. They have no domain over us. We can organize. There's more of us than them. And if this is what they're going to do, then we can easily make sure that they don't have the buildings to operate out of. And that's what I thought was most beautiful about that.
Yeah, well, they only have the power that we consent to give them.
Right, and I think that's like, it's clear right now that they do have the power, right? Except maybe in that part of Minneapolis, like they have the power everywhere else. What that really showed us is that we do as a collective, when we get together, we have the ability to throw that off. Like we have the ability to reject that their authority. And so I think that's what was really powerful. And I guess maybe I came off a little bit wrong. Like I'm not saying first step is burn down every private business, right? So I think we're really kind of on the same page. But Henry, you made a point about the targets insured. Well, all these businesses are insured or should be, right? And generally, when it comes to an insurance loss, people are going to come out ahead after the loss. They're going to come out better, and it's going to be harmful. It's going to be emotional. It's going to be tolling on them as it's something that, oh, this was a business I poured my heart and soul into, and once they get over that mental hurdle of dealing with the loss of something that they poured into, I mean, financially, they're probably going to be in a better position. I mean, there's loss of business as a portion of your insurance. Again, assuming people have the appropriate coverage, which they should, and you can rebuild. And so it's like we're talking about things. We're talking about property. We're talking about anything that was stolen or destroyed can be rebuilt or replaced. And this is where when it comes to the point where people are just simply not being heard. If the whole fucking country's got to burn in order to change it, I say let it burn. Like it's time for change. I'm not an advocate for burning stuff just for the sake of burning it, but
yeah.
It's time for change. People need to pay attention. And if a whole city needs to burn down or a dozen cities need to burn down to get there, like let's go, let's burn them. You know what I mean? It's time for that change. Enough is enough. I don't want to see another man die in the street any more than anybody else does. And hopefully that resonates with more people, and hopefully this gains momentum. I was very concerned, I think maybe some people were relieved yesterday when they heard that the charges came down, and maybe they thought the protesters were going to back off. And I was very relieved that it hasn't slowed down a bit.
Yeah, I was about to say the exact same thing. I'm so happy that that's the case, because like I'm seeing protests now in I think it's like 13, 14 different cities. Like it's not slowing down. If anything, it's accelerating, and it's beautiful.
And that's the best part is like, the Minnesota called in all of their National Guard troops to go to Minneapolis and St. Paul, right? There's a lot of other cities in Minnesota, right? So if other places wanted to pop up and kick off right now, it'd be a great time. And so like this is where you start to realize that the resources of the state, while they seem massive, while they seem like overwhelming, that when you start breaking it down, you start realizing how many of us there are versus how many of them there are. Then you start to realize who really does have the power. There's like 330 million people in this country, and there's about 1 million law enforcement. I mean, I would say that they're significantly outnumbered.
And, I want to touch on like how these protests are expanding. And I am overjoyed to see that the protests are continuing, and they should continue, because quite frankly, from watching the military monitoring channels that I watch on Twitter and all, U.S. Northern Command is mobilizing different divisions in preparation for the spread of this. The powers that be are actually looking to be poised to try to be prepared for what they probably project is a continued spread. But in Philadelphia today, the protest just started today in Philadelphia. They started at 2 p.m. And there was 2 simultaneous protests going on. The first was a beautiful protest where everyone kneeled for 8 minutes in solidarity with George. And then there was a simultaneous protest going on the steps of the art museum. But they kicked off the rioting by burning a Pennsylvania State Police car in the streets. The Philadelphia is going right at the state without zero looking back, and that is amazing because it's like, okay, we're Philly's doing it right now. We're targeting the state. We're telling the state that do not try to silence us. But what's unfortunate is the state right now in Minnesota, in other states. I saw a report. I don't know who put it out, that apparently an explosion went off in one of the. I think it was in South Carolina at one of the rallies. You got reports of people being shot in Ohio. You got reports of people being shot in Minneapolis by the police. I mean, this is getting bad in one sense too, because the state is now just senselessly killing people or hurting them and maiming them, and that's what. As much as my heart is joyed by the fact that we are continuing to protest this, to riot this, that these little tiny charges didn't quiet this. I'm scared of what may be happening, and it led to a discussion I had with my roommate earlier today about what we think is happening. Is this the start of a revolutionary change in America in how we look at the state and how we look at police? What do you guys think this is really leading towards?
So I want to be optimistic. I want to be optimistic that all of these people that LARP as these amazing crusaders and everything like that, they're gonna jump onto this as their boogaloo or whatever, and that will somehow not lose the message, and that will somehow manage to make meaningful change. But seeing that we're only 4 days out from the actual 8-day of incident, and Trump is already on Twitter saying that he's authorizing lethal force, like via Twitter, like fucking tweet. And I mean, we're only 4 days out. It was only one city that there was actually violent, not even violent, but just rioting. And he's already authorizing lethal force. I worry tremendously that this will be violently quelled and it will die out. And I don't know how to stop that. I don't have any optimistic answers on that. So yeah.
And I think I would venture to guess that most people have that same concern. I mean, that's, as much as I'm excited to see this kind of revolutionary behavior, it's all for naught if there's no revolutionary change, right? And certainly it doesn't benefit any of us to see this, more death and destruction with absent the change. I think I'm also optimistic. I think that, you got to remember at the end of the day, the cops actually are human beings. Whether they exhibit the traits of a human being on a regular basis, that remains to be seen sometimes. But they know they're not disillusioned to what they do and what they are and who they are. And I think that when it comes to, there's only so many of them that are really willing to act as callously as that one guy was. I don't even care to remember his name,
honestly.
Right. Most of them, a lot of them are kind of don't realize every little thing that they do is bad, but they realize the underlying. They realize the things that they do that are bad, where they ignore shit that they should stand up to. They get that, right? But I think that they sometimes don't understand that the extortion racket they participate in with traffic tickets, for instance. Some of them I think believe that they're doing the right thing and they're keeping people safe. But when it comes to violently assaulting a crowd of protesters, I think that there's much less appetite for that. Maybe I'm being too optimistic. I think that there's much less appetite for that from law enforcement community and hopefully from the military as well. So this is not. It's very easy for soldiers to go overseas, and I saw it because I did it, and treat the enemy, right, the foreigners, as less than human beings. It's much different to go into your own community, because keep in mind that these police officers, for the most part, live in these communities or near their communities. They're not traveling halfway around the world to do this, and so it's much different to deal with it within your community and do the kind of things that are required to suppress an uprising. And so I guess I'm cautiously optimistic that there'll be less appetite to engage in that type of behavior that would be required to violently quell this type of revolutionary activity. Time will tell, I guess.
I'd love to be that optimistic in that sense. Like, I think that what's going to happen is you're not going to have this stereotypical, like, idyllic situation where you've got perfectly peaceful protesters. You've got a girl that's got a flower that she's about to put in the gun of somebody that's lined up against her. You're going to have a slightly more chaotic situation. You're going to have a rock being thrown by the protesters or something like that, and it's going to give them the excuse that they need to open fire. And I don't know. I worry about that a lot.
My big, and Aaron, you brought us to this topic a little bit. My concern is the lunatic we have in the White House right now. He hasn't put out one tweet about this. He's put out multiple tweets about this. Earlier, 8 or 9 hours ago, he put a tweet out saying that it's MAGA night in DC, whatever the hell he means by that. I can only take that as kind of mobilizing his cult against these protesters. I mean, he's openly talked about the military doing what they need to do to quell this. He earlier today said the unlimited power of the U.S. military could be used. I mean, I wish I could be optimistic like you, Brian, but I honestly fear not just what the military might do if, again, a rock, as Aaron said, got thrown, or just the most minor thing to make them snap and fire into a crowd. But I'm also concerned what the MAGA cult is going to take from their dear leaders saying about this situation. What are they going to do? We've already seen what Trump can incite in Charleston, South Carolina, when a alt-right guy plowed down a crowd of protesters. I am deathly terrified of what his cult would do as cities all over the nation are rioting in protest of this.
I guess we'll see, right? I mean, time will tell. I think that if you look back historically, and you can point at events where there was what we refer to as massacres, right? Kent State, 4 people died, right? And it was a huge deal. 4 people died, and it's 4 people. It's 4 people too many, right? But if the police kill more than 4 people have died throughout this all over the country at this point, I'm reasonably certain of. One in Detroit last night. And you mentioned somebody being shot somewhere, it's happening. So I just think that when an event happens where that happens and the police violently overreact, if this was happening in one city at a time and it was just this, there was one kind of uprising, it would be easy to silence it with that type of a thing. Like, okay, there's this, mass event where the police went overboard and killed a bunch of people and, people lost their will. But when that happens in Minneapolis, for example, all that's going to do is fuel the 30 other locations that are kicking off at the same time and say, you're not going to do that to us. And so it would have to be fairly coordinated, I would imagine, for the suppression to be successful. And it would have to be extremely violent. And yeah. I just think that I would hope that, we're not capable as a society on any side of this issue of perpetuating the type of violence that it would cause. I mean, really, what it needs to take is there needs to be some massive reform in the police state. There needs to be some acceptance of that. There needs to be some understanding from the police. There needs to be some meaningful legislation. There needs to be some real significant change. But I just don't see. I mean, I guess it could get really ugly. I just don't see it happening. I don't see it getting that ugly. I think that more people are talk than they are action. And when you look at those MAGA people, great example. Look at Virginia. Virginia, when they had their big rally, their protest, right? We're going to protest. It wasn't a protest, right? It was a rally when they were talking about gun rights. And the governor said, you know, you cannot come in this area. We're putting up fences and you cannot carry your firearms in this area. And the Trump supporters, these MAGA people, these right-wing conservative, and I know there's some libertarians in the group, but probably not many. They went and they were like all about being law-abiding, right? That's who these people are. Is they're this law-abiding and we're just and we're good and everything. They don't have what it takes to stand up to do the dirty work that Trump would love to see them do. I really don't think they do. I think that as much as we like to dislike Trump supporters and conservatives because they have some really bad takes and they're awful human beings when it comes to foreign policy and various other things in dealing with immigrants, I don't think that they have it in them to murder their fellow countrymen. Maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, I can see where you're coming from there. I can.
I got a quick question for you, Brian. Do you think that the protesters would be in a better position, have a better leverage over the situation if many of them were armed? Or do you think it's better for them to remain unarmed for the most part for the optics?
That's a great question, because it's a question that I struggle with myself as I'm getting ready to go out. I'm like, okay, I can put my one pistol under my shirt here, and I can tuck the other one in my waistband, and I can wear a jacket. Like, I don't know. Open carrying, man, that's a great question. Like, that is it. I mean, beyond
the whole white privilege thing, because you can't deny that was a thing, it seemed to work out really well for Michigan. The Michigan protests where they stormed the government buildings and then just, had a little photo shoot and then walked away. They were all armed to the teeth. They all had their rifles, and it seemed to work out quite well for them.
No, and in general, I would agree with you 100%. And in fact, when I was doing my cop watching, I was armed all the time, open carrying, like as a point of protest. Like, yeah, you're armed, so am I. Like, I'm not scared of you. I just think that the dynamics of this situation are such that I don't know, with the crowd that you're dealing with and the attitude that the police have towards that crowd, because keep in mind that in Michigan, the police, these people that were protesting the government. These were right-wingers that were protesting, a Democratic governor and her orders, and the police were there. These are their people, right? These are the people that put thin blue line flags on their car and stuff. So, I think that there was a lot less tension. Where here you're dealing with the cops literally hate these people. The cops hate the people on the left. The people on the left hate the cops. And I think that if you introduce open firearms to that, it's just a dynamic. I'm not sure. I just can't flesh out the details. I can't. I could probably make a fairly compelling case, at least in my own head, in either direction. And so for that reason, I'm very torn on what the right answer is.
I mean, if I could take a stab at this for a second, I mean, I see the argument of, okay, if they were armed, they'd be better prepared to defend themselves if my concerns actually happened. But on the same token, and I'm going to say this, I mean, Aaron's right. There's an element of white privilege to carrying a firearm that we need to address. With the tension, with the situation as dynamic as it is, a black dude or any other minority carrying a firearm, opened or concealed, in these protests, it gives the officers a reason to go at them. It gives them a reason. Oh, why are you carrying that gun? I fear that if they were, it would just result in more insane police abuse happening than is already occurring. And so, like, the fact that, by what I can see, a lot of them are unarmed is, in my opinion, for the best.
And they're still being effective, right? But if you look at the dynamic with that, is like, again, when I open carried all the time, when I was protesting the police, they weren't afraid of me any more than I was afraid of them, right? I had a pistol, they had a pistol, we were on even ground. But at the same time, when you have a traffic stop and the cops pull over a black guy and he reaches for something. They're like, oh, I thought he had a gun, and they shoot him a dozen times. Like, you know, you knew I had a gun, and you didn't shoot me a dozen times. You thought he had a gun, and you shot him. Like, just that, you know, the fact that if you have that group of people, be it whether it's minorities, whether it's people of color, or whether it's the leftists, the anarchists that I've been hearing a lot about anarchists on the news lately, which is fantastic. But whether, you know, those people, if you introduce a firearm on their side, then the cops will have this "I fear for my life" thing, right?
Yep.
Where again, and it's a white privilege thing. There's absolutely no doubt about that. The people that were carrying weapons in the state capitol in Michigan a few weeks ago or a month ago, whenever that was, they absolutely exercised their privilege. And absent that, I'm just worried about what the consequences are. If somebody wants to take that on, and I mean, I would fully support it either way. If somebody is comfortable carrying a firearm and knows how to handle themselves and is willing to take on the responsibility and the liability with that, I don't care who you are, I fully support that. And so it's I'm not at a point where I would encourage it though either way.
Yeah. And yeah, I 100% everything Brian just said. that is there's nothing else I can add to it. I guess to wrap this all up, what I have to say here is that I really hope these protests do continue until true change occurs. I hope they spread. I really do. I mean, they've hit Philadelphia now. I'm waiting to see what small suburbs outside of Philadelphia are going to start organizing protests and demanding change. But I want to say that this is a glimmer of hope. At least where I live, I'm seeing police departments and chiefs coming out and saying that the techniques used on Mr. Floyd were absolutely horrendous, and that they will continue to work with the NAACP to ensure that they know how to operate within these minority communities. I'm hoping that I'm seeing this glimmer of hope on the horizon start happening here, and I'm hoping this spreads to other suburbs across the country. It would warm me up big time. So I know, Brian, you're itching to go. You're itching to get ready to go. Definitely thank you for coming on the show, my man. Hopefully we'll have another roundtable discussion like this on some other topic later on. Aaron, thank you for coming on. Your insight, as always, is wonderful to listen to. And to everybody else that's taking on the fight, keep it up. Let's change society for the better, and let's change things for the better. And if I can figure out a way to get my ass to Philadelphia tonight, I'll be on my way. The state and the police took away my driver's license, so
I was pretty excited. I just found out today that they actually started protests in Austin, and so I live near Austin, so I could theoretically make the trip up there.
Yeah, it's kicking off in multiple cities. James told me he's up in Flint. I thought he was going to go to Detroit. He's up in Flint. Like, I got a couple choices here.
Yeah, right now the only one near me, it's Philadelphia or Harrisburg or Pittsburgh. And well, Harrisburg and Pittsburgh are on the other side of the state. So, but yeah, hopefully it continues to grow, and hopefully we bring real change. And in the end, honor George Floyd's memory with true change. So thank you guys for coming on. To everybody watching, thank you for watching The Voice of Liberty. My name is Henry Conley. As always, awaken the voice of liberty.